Hoje é 2 de março de 2014, estamos aqui no Hotel Lison, em Curitiba, na ocasião do Fórum Mundial de Vida Inteligente no Universo. E agora nós temos a honra de entrevistar o Marcel, que é neto do oficial militar que participou da investigação de um dos casos mais clássicos da ufologia mundial, que foi o incidente de Roswell. Marcel, thanks very much for this moment. We are glad to have you here in Brazil in our Congress.
I am very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
I will ask few questions and I will ask you to speak as much as possible.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, can you tell us what is the incident of Roswell?
The incident of Roswell started back with Kenneth Arnold citing what he ended up by calling flying saucers in the state of Washington. Within a couple of weeks of that initial sighting and his dictation, he called them flying saucers. A number of these same type of saucers were seen in and around Roswell and the White Sands Missile Base. On or about the evening of July 3rd, approximately 1:30 a.m., there was a sighting from a pilot at Alamogordo Air Force Base of a strange craft, a UFO, that was going down. It was emitting a bright blue tail. They searched for it and they could not find it the next day. That same evening, a rancher named Mac Brazel was at his ranch house in the middle of the desert. And during this time, there was also an incredible storm, lightning, thunder, that sort of thing, rain. And during that storm, he heard an explosion, much stronger than thunder, that kind of thing. It actually shook his entire house and the windows. The next morning, he went out by horseback in the direction of what he thought heard the explosion, and he came across a herd of sheep. And they were at one end of a field, and on the other side of the field there was a water hole, and there was metallic debris that the livestock absolutely refused to cross. He eventually led them way around and brought them to water, and he stated that if he wouldn't have been there, those sheep would have died before crossing that field of metal. He had heard of Kenneth Arnold's sightings of the UFOs, of the flying saucers, and he thought that maybe this was one of them. And he thought, well, maybe they'd give me a reward if I picked up some of this metal and brought it to town, which is Roswell. He brought the debris to the local sheriff, that gentleman named Sheriff Wilcox. And Sheriff Wilcox and him laid it out on a table, and Wilcox could not determine. He said it didn't look like an airplane part to him. He didn't really know what he was looking at, but he definitely thought it was important enough to give a call to the military base, which was the 509th Bombing Group. They were the only nuclear bombing group in the entire world controlled by the United States. And that call was made to a gentleman named Colonel Blanchard. Colonel Blanchard was my grandfather's boss. My grandfather was the head of intelligence for the nuclear bombing program and for that air base, of course. And they selected him to go to the sheriff's office and take a look, just to get an idea of what it was. My grandfather went to that office and examined the debris, and he wasn't given to speculation, but it was nothing he'd ever seen either. He called back, talked to his boss, Colonel Blanchard, and said, I don't know what this stuff is, it's not ours, whatever it is, not one of our airplanes, not anything I've seen before anyway. And they immediately commissioned Mr. Cabot, who was a disinformation officer, basically a federal worker, not a military officer, but a federal worker, and my grandfather to go ahead and drive out to the site where the debris was found. Now, my grandfather and Cabot were friends, and they made this journey. By the time they got there, it was late at night. And the Mac Brazel was a nice guy. He said, you can stay at the house. You can stay with me and we'll leave the next morning to go out to look at the debris, which they did. They drove out early the next morning and they came across the field. It was much bigger than what they had originally anticipated. Somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 mile in length, in a fan shape, all coming from a central point, which is presumably it crashed and spread out in a fan. My grandfather looked over the debris and asked Cabot to go ahead and return to the base. There was a little ensuing argument because Cabot's position was that of disinformation. He needed to create a story that whatever they had found to do a cover-up, to silence anybody that might want to talk about it, state that it was an airplane perhaps. But my grandfather was steadfast that whatever this was, it wasn't an airplane. Couldn't have been an airplane. And he eventually talked Cabot into going home, going back to the military base. And the reason for that discussion was that my grandfather realized the gravity of the material. He at that point thought that this was, in his words, not made by human hands. And he knew that once he got to the base of the material, that whatever was out there would be instantly cleaned up, would be taken away. And he thought that this was something of such importance that he wanted to share it with his family. So he got a box, filled it with a little bit of the debris, and returned to his house. And that's where he woke up my father and my grandmother, excuse me. And they were wondering why, for one thing, her husband or my father's dad was waking him up at midnight to go look at something. When he came into the kitchen, on a small space, maybe 10 feet by 5 feet, was debris scattered about. Metallic, sheet metal, beams in the shape of I-beams, and like a black plastic, little pieces. And my father couldn't understand at that point is why was his father so excited about whatever this kind of thing was. And he asked my father to try to combine the pieces. Could you find anything that fit together? Also, do you see any kind of remnants of, at the time the technology was tubes. Do you see anything that resembles a tube or wires or anything like that? And they found nothing. They actually couldn't find a way to combine any of it together. And after about an hour, they put that debris back in the box. Then my grandfather returned to the base. During this time, the local station got wind of some strange crash out in the field. And then that's where they released a newspaper clipping saying that the military had found a crashed UFO, flying saucer. That's where everything changed quite dramatically. My grandfather would return the next morning to his house and meet with both my father and his wife and say that what you saw last night did not happen, that it was a complete non-event, and that you were not to talk about it to anybody. During this period, my grandfather wasn't directly involved, but there was a second crash site. And in that second crash site, instead of just being shards of metal and pieces of metal, there was actually a spacecraft-looking triangular object crushed in the side of a mountain. My grandfather, as he told that story, is that I wasn't there, but the people that were there, he would trust with his life. And they would be not given, again, a speculation. And if they said they saw what they saw, then that's what they saw. And in that second crash site, they found alien bodies. One that was alive, one that was injured, and two that had passed, were gone. And they had...
Like this one?
Yes. And they assembled that debris from the fuselage and the bodies and brought them back to Roswell.
One was alive?
One was alive and uninjured.
And your grandfather told you about this?
He told me, further in the story, he was witness to one of the bodies.
He?
Yes,
he
to
saw
one of the bodies, the dead bodies. When he was...
Like this one?
Yes.
And the government is denying until now?
Still denying, but my father, not too long ago, went to the Pentagon, and he met with the Senate Appropriations Committee, the head of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and they went down a half dozen stories into a private soundproof, you know, a safe room, they call it. And he pulled out a book on Roswell and threw it in front of my dad and said, "This is real." And my dad's response was simply, "I know it's real." And he said that I'm not here to try to convince anybody that it happened or not, but there's money being drained to cover up Roswell. Lots of taxpayer money, even today, is being used to cover the story up. And as the head of Senate Appropriations, he was trying to find out where that drain of money was going. So his was purely a monetary position, but in that conversation, it was that, no, that they know it was real. So
it's amazing, because when we talk about extraterrestrials, the common citizen say, we do not have any evidence about extraterrestrials. But what you are talking and what is written in this book,
yes,
is that your grandfather is a witness of a body of extraterrestrial in a spaceship crashed.
Correct. He was directly involved. In fact, when he went back, where this transpired is they created a special pressurized box to put debris in and that kind of thing that he flew along with to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, or Wright-Pat Air Base.
What is the patent? The position in the army of your grandfather?
He was the head of intelligence for the nuclear bombing program. So it's safe to say that he was the highest intelligence officer in the entire world.
He was a colonel, major?
He was a major, and then they made him into a colonel after this happened.
Understood. So official.
Yes. So he moved up. When he was in the at Wright-Patterson, there's some famous photos of him going into a room. When he got to Wright-Patterson, he was under the assumption that the military was actually going to announce to the world that yes, this happened. But when he walked in, all he saw were parts of what's called a Rowan target, or a Flechter target, made basically of paperback tinfoil and wood pieces and that kind of thing. And he was ordered to take those pictures holding this fake debris. And after that, he was sent back to the air base, and he went home. Then he received instructions, or 2 weeks of basically a vacation. He and both of his boss were given a leave. The reality of it is that leave never took place. Both Blanchard and he went back to Wright Airfield, to, people call it the Blue Room, and that is where he was able to see a body. That's where they saw where they're trying to reconstruct part of the spacecraft itself. A couple of interesting side notes about the Blue Room. Blue is argon, and one of the theories is that to preserve the body of the alien, they actually use argon gas to do that, and that's kind of where all this.
Do you believe USA has got this technology anyway?
Some of it definitely, and like I've been speaking, I think we're gaining more in a biological sense than we are on a purely mechanical technology. I think part of what we're learning about longevity, or learning how to look into our DNA structure, comes from investigations. And the thought was that these, and that my grandfather thought, that these basically lived 1,000 years or more.
Would it be the reason they are denying and doing a kind of campaign to take out the credibility of UFO phenomena, because they have a technological interest, and also they need to cover up, because if they agree it's real officially, other countries will ask information about this technology, because this thing belongs to the humanity?
I always think that the simplest answer is usually the most correct, and I agree completely with what you're saying, in that on two sides. If the US government admits that this exists, then they're also admitting there's something else a lot more powerful than they are. Number two is, Yes, they want to hoard that information. They want to keep that information. Yeah, and admitting to it would destroy, 60 years plus of lies and cover up and that kind of thing. So in one place, I think they're in a position where they really can't admit to it openly. Although even Obama recently came out wanting to know what was going on, with Roswell.
How is this subject in the higher level society, for example, military society, space people, do they believe this Roswell is real or they think it's not real?
Out of thousands of people I've met and talked about Roswell, maybe 1 or 2 didn't believe it wasn't real. Pretty much everybody that I talk to believes that it's valid, that it's real, and nobody believes in the excuses our government has given us. There's just been too much our government's done that can't be trusted, basically, in what they're telling us, and none of it fits.
Would the spaceship be shut? Would the military shut the spaceship to fall it down?
There is an idea that we have plasma gun technology, and there is even some evidence that perhaps we do possess something that would knock this down, would have knocked this and others out of the sky.
Because it's not common to have crash with extraterrestrial spaceship.
And the way I look at it, it might be too simple, but I think that these crafts might be inherently fragile, but the energy field that's created around them that allows them to go from here to there might be where their strength comes from. And just perhaps either what we did can just... What year?
Yeah.
1947.
47, it was after Second Great War.
Yeah, just after the Second World War.
What we could tell is that until the Second Great War, there was not a risk for extraterrestrial with our technology. Right. As we developed many weapons during the war, they were not aware enough about the risk of being shot.
Yes.
So this occurred, and since then, they are taking care about us.
Yes.
Be careful if you're a human being. Now they have risky weapons.
Be scared of us. I don't subscribe to what a lot of people do, but I do believe that these beings are benevolent, and they're not here to hurt us. They'd be here to, if anything,
probably observer and researchers.
Yes, that's what we would be if we got the when we get to that point. We're not going to be sending military. We're going to be sending scientists, diplomats, and that sort of thing, not warring.
And probably this has changed the history, the future of this history.
Yes.
History, because since this incident, they adopted a different position about us.
There is, and there's, from government to civilians, even from speculating of what the extraterrestrials, whenever we've come encounter with anything in this world, airplanes try to shoot them down. And I was thinking to show their, and I think if they wanted to, they could probably knock that fighter out of the air if that was their intention. Instead, they just, they're not fazed by it. And on the other side, next, like where my hometown in Great Falls, Montana, sightings of UFOs that set down the nuclear plants, the warheads, that sort of thing. In Russia, it happens. There's more and more evidence that they're almost protecting ourselves from ourselves than anything else.
Great. Okay, just Marcel, we are really very proud to have you among us taking part of this conference, and thank you very much for your interview.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm welcome back.
I appreciated it very much.